You were talking about the crossover there, and we've certainly seen that in the world of boxing, Simon. And on Friday in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, it was the crossover fight once again. Francis Ngannou involved once again. No Tyson Fury this time. He was sitting ringside watching it, but it was Anthony Joshua in there with him. And Joshua did a job on Ngannou. Second round knockout. In a moment, we're going to speak to former MMA fighter, director of fighting at the Professional Fighters League, Dan Hardy. But Joshua, post-fight, said this.
My life don't really change after that type of stuff. Do you know what I've noticed with you lot? You realise how much your life changes when you lose. When you win, it's just on to the next. So it is what it is, isn't it? It's a tough game. The heavyweight division is one of the toughest divisions in the world. So yeah, it is what it is. We've got the job done. People can question me. I'll do my best every time, and what will be. But I'm not even buzzing about the win. Just on to the next. Let's go.
Let's go. So he's forgotten about it already. Former MMA fighter Dan Hardy joins us. Dan, last week, certainly on the day of the fight, you were buzzing about the opportunity that Ngannou had. Where did it go wrong for him?
Man, I couldn't have been more wrong, really, guys. Could I, to be honest? You know, going into the Tyson Fury fight, of course, I'm a big fan and supporter of Ngannou, and I made all the arguments for him, and then I picked against him. I said Tyson Fury was going to stop him. This time around, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm gonna stick with my own argument. I'm gonna back Ngannou. And as soon as the fight started, I was worried straight away. He was twitching with his backhand, which he wasn't doing in the Fury fight. He looked more eager, more enthusiastic, which I think because he's got the confidence that now he can do 10 rounds. He just opened himself up. You know, it was a beautiful performance from AJ. It really, really was. I mean, it was crisp. It was calculated, and Ngannou just looked completely outclassed. And, you know, I mean, all's right with the universe now, isn't it? AJ moves on with his boxing career, and hopefully we get Francis Ngannou back in the PFL.
Yeah, I was going to put it to you now, Dan, though. After what we've seen, does that put an end to boxing's crossover nonsense, as some might describe it?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I think, you know, with the direction that combat sports are going, I always think there's going to be intrigue around these types of fights. I mean, you know, especially at heavyweight, you know, we've got a guy now called Renan Fajeda, who's 6'8", and straight away, as soon as he won his last fight, John Jones, who I'm sure you guys will be aware of, said that he would be able to beat Francis Ngannou. So Ngannou's coming back into MMA to fight another really, really tough individual that could potentially be problematic in the boxing world as well. I don't mind it personally. I like these crossovers. I think they're a bit of fun. And I think prize fighters, you know, if the money's on the table and the intrigue's there, then go and get it. But I am certainly happy to see AJ back on track, and the fact that he's going to be there ready for the Fury versus Usyk winner.
Well, Dan, Simon, you just said at the outset you probably wouldn't watch it, but no doubt, like me, you ended up watching it.
I did watch it, yeah. I did watch it because I thought it was appropriate. I did watch it because I was going to be asked questions about it. Good. I'm glad it happened because I got to listen to a lot of nonsense, including from people like Dan last week, about how this crossover fight was going to be something meaningful. Because the idea, this constant floating that I had, if these heavyweights are what they think they are, then they cannot possibly get into a situation where they're losing to MMA fighters. So Anthony Joshua, there was a Hail Mary out there for heavyweight boxing by Anthony Joshua doing what he did, because ultimately we had to listen to this ridiculous narrative being built up around MMA fighters crossing over into boxing and the skill sets being comparable and how resolute and how rigid he was and how strong he was. He got what Tyson Fury should have done to him. These are elite heavyweight boxers. This is what they should be able to do to MMA fighters. And the challenge for people like Francis Ngannou is, by listening to people like Dan, what they got involved with was getting drunk on their own belief system. They could go in with a heavyweight contender like Anthony Joshua and give themselves a real chance. Now, it draws a comparison between how bad Tyson Fury must have been, because Anthony Joshua did his job. And by the way, I thought his interviews after the fight were brilliant. I thought he conducted himself really well. And I think there were two Hail Marys on that particular evening. A, for the rest of the boxing division, they haven't got to deal with Zhilei Zhang. Only Joseph Parker's got to deal with him now because everyone wants to avoid that fella. And Parker beating him.
Right.
And Anthony Joshua re-establishing the credibility back of boxing, because whilst everyone can sit there and go how wonderful it is for the Saudis to be spraying cash around and making fights happen, I don't think this was a good look for heavyweight boxing. I don't think it was great. I think it was great for Francis Ngannou. Great to get attention for PFL, which is who Dan represents, with a PFL fighter in Francis Ngannou. But that was what should have happened in the first fight with Tyson Fury and didn't.
Well, Dan, what Simon is saying there, in other words, MMA fighters coping in the boxing ring with boxers, and the best boxers like Joshua, it was a false narrative to think they even could.
Yeah, look, potentially, I can hear you can make that argument, but I'm a fight fan, and fight fans get excited about these things. And if you can't get excited about a fist fight between two guys that are 250 pounds, then you must be generally looking for bad things on a daily basis. I honestly feel depressed just listening to your perspective, to be honest, my friend. I understand that you're a purist and that you love boxing, but if you love combat sports, you'll also appreciate that no heavyweight boxer could ever cross into mixed martial arts.
It's absurd that the WBC can suggest to anybody that they mandated Tyson Fury to fight a novice fighter that hasn't fought for 18 months because they couldn't find another opponent. The credibility of boxing is equally as important. And whilst it gives you an opportunity to showcase MMA through the prism of boxing, I think it does bugger all for boxing's credibility when you've got the best in the division being mandated to fight novices in a sideshow in Saudi Arabia because it suits the Saudi Arabian eyes on the prize for the kingdom.
But you're going to support the sport you love, Dan, aren't you? I presume you are.
I was a boxing fan before mixed martial arts even existed. But what I will say is that there are a lot more people that watched AJV Ngannou than watched him against Wallen or Helenius. That's the problem with heavyweight boxing right now, is that it doesn't appeal to anybody that isn't a purist. Whereas these crossover fights, they bring more intrigue. People will have watched that fight and now they'll be invested in AJ like they wouldn't.
And that's great. And there'll be more people watching Jake Paul fight Mike Tyson in a freak show of a fight than watch that event on Saturday night. So what we're suggesting is because it's a crossover and gets eyes on the prize, that somehow it has credibility. That's like saying influencers in society are meaningful people. It really doesn't go to the focus of what we're talking about, which is boxing has lost its credibility because of fights like this, not because of other aspects.
No, I think boxing's recovering its credibility because it's opening itself up to a world where there isn't politics. Like, who would have seen Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren standing next to each other on a stage without the money from Saudi?
Agreed.
The problem with boxing is that there are too many politics.
Agreed.
Like, I can't enjoy boxing like I could do when I go back and watch The Four Kings or Eubank versus Ben.
Agreed.
Because most of the time I'm watching fights that don't really mean anything, and I'm watching one guy that is fully expected to absolutely starch the next guy. That for me is not combat sports. That's beating up on a cab driver. Like, what I want to see is intrigue and interest, right? I hear what you're saying about Jake Paul. I don't want to see him fight Mike Tyson. Absolutely, I don't. But because there's intrigue there, combat sports needs to learn from this. Like, there are loads of boxers out there that are superior at their craft that no one cares about. Like, they need to learn a lesson in the entertainment.
The only
industry.
flip side to that, Dan, is
you
that
can say what you want about Jake Paul, but people want to watch him because they're following his journey.
But people want to. I mean, I've got a 3-year-old son that watches marbles being dropped in a bucket, and there's 75 million views on YouTube. Doesn't make it worthwhile watching for everybody else. But the challenge for me is that with boxing, if boxing crosses over to MMA, it gets decimated in the auction. I was talking to Leon Edwards about him fighting a boxer, and they expect to knock him out in one round. But for boxing to have MMA crossover and it be suggested that MMA can do things to boxers, I think it damages the credibility of boxing. And the reasons why I'm so pleased about Anthony Joshua doing his job is because the argument I was having with various people last week, how can you be elite? I don't care how big and strong Ngannou is. The guy's not fought for 18 months. He's had one fight. He's had a knee rebuild. And we're putting him at the top of the tree to fight the best of the best, and they're making a fool of himself. Fury made a fool of himself in the division by that performance against Ngannou, and I'm very pleased that Anthony Joshua did his job.
Fair enough. Dan, one more from me before we leave you. Do you think now we are bound to see Fury take on Joshua? Although Usyk will have something to say about that, but what's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most intriguing fight. We know what happens when Usyk fights Joshua, and I think this is a different version of Joshua. I think we saw a lot of confidence, self-belief in him against Ngannou, which to me was the most intriguing part about it, because this was a much bigger risk than any other fight that AJ's ever had. To lose to a guy that's had one pro boxing match and lost, he put a tremendous amount of pressure on his shoulders. So I think he really showed something in his confidence and his self-belief, which makes me excited about him going forward. Whether it's Fury, whether it's Usyk, I don't really care. I do think it will end up being the Fury fight because I think the bigger man beats the smaller man. And I think Fury is tricky enough and has got a high enough fight IQ to be able to get to Usyk, especially given the fact that he showed unprepared for Ngannou and was kind of embarrassed sitting ringside when AJ made it look so easy. I think we're going to get the best version of Tyson Fury against Usyk, and I think he gets the job done, and then we get the AJ fight.
Dan, terrific. We love your content. Thank you so much for being with us. Dan Hardy, former MMA fighter and director of fighting at the Professional Fighters League. What are you saying? Are you shaking your head
I'm
there?
saying that we don't, because if Fury beats Usyk, there's a rematch. So we don't get that necessarily. The key question should be: is the narrative will now be written up? Should Usyk step aside and allow Joshua to fight Fury? That'll be mooted in the British press.
Well,
but what will also be mooted is the rematch clause. Should someone step aside from the rematch and allow, if it's Fury beats Usyk, to fight Joshua, which will be the biggest fight?
Tyson Fury beat Usyk?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a world of boxing.
Not the one that
Simon.
fought Ngannou, no.
Anybody's guess, isn't it? Expect the unexpected. We're almost at 12:20.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.